What if I told you that the biggest challenge you're facing right now isn't your product or service? It's the space your product or service lives in or doesn't. On this episode of the Podcast Interview Marketing Show, I talk with Kevin Maney, the co-author of Play Bigger and one of the original evangelists for category design. If you've ever wondered how companies like Tesla, Amazon, or even your favorite podcast brands become category kings and queens, you're in for a masterclass. Kevin breaks down why solving a problem isn't enough. You need to name the problem. You need to design the space your solution fits into and lead the market narrative. It's not about getting better. It's about being different, being first and being memorable. He shares how the power of story, naming the villain, and building a strong point of view can help reshape how your market sees you, and more importantly, how they remember you. So if you're a coach, consultant, nonfiction author, or an entrepreneur tired of playing in someone else's sandbox, this episode is your permission slip to design your own. Let's dive in. Kevin, it's great to have you here. And let's start where I was 10 years ago when somebody said category design. And I'm like, what? Can you unpack us with that for those people that may have not heard that term in marketing, what category design is really all about?
Sure, Tom. Thanks. And so all of this goes back, as you know, to a book that came out almost 10 years ago now called Play Bigger. And that I wrote with some other Silicon Valley guys, former founders and CEOs. But anyway, let's just try to get to your question. So if you look around, I mean, so lots and lots of companies say they are, or they want to create a new market category. And in fact, if you look at like tons of venture capital firm pages, a lot of them say, first thing they'll say is like, we invest in companies that create new categories or win categories, that kind of thing. And so companies want to do this, but very few actually succeed at doing it. And a big part of the reason is that they design a product. They might design a great product, but then they kind of throw it out into the world and hope for this legendary like product market fit, right? Which is basically kind of hoping there's a market for your product. And the insight that we brought to this was, you could actually design the market category you're trying to create, not just design the product, but design the space you're trying to create, so that people understand why they need what you're making and demand what you're making. But not only that, if you design the space really well, you design it so it benefits your company. As other competitors come in, they have to follow your lead. So the whole point of category design is saying that creating a product is not enough. Even a great product is not enough. What you have to do is actually create that new space in people's minds. It's a market category, and make them understand or help them understand why they want to demand your product.
The word that you used in there with design, right? One of our Tomisms in the company is that hope is not a strategy. And most people just, they start and they hope great things will happen and they're imagining it, they're visioning it. Well, they didn't design anything in there. And where you started with there is the problem, not the product. And what I see is too many people are in love with the product or service. They want to come on and talk about that. And you're saying start with the problem. How do you mean that?
Well, I mean, even in just what we talked about is the way I describe category design to you. I described what the problem was, in a very succinct way, right? The companies have a hard time doing this particular thing and fail at what they're trying to do. So yes, I mean, first of all, if you start with understanding the problem to be solved, a problem that either has never had a way to be solved before because technology didn't allow a way to do that, or sometimes new conditions and new technologies create new problems that didn't exist before. So if you have to, the first step in this is to truly understand the problem to be solved and who has it. And if you can tell people that you make them see that and understand that I have this problem, then it's much easier to say, but I have a solution for your problem, versus the other way. If you go to almost any tech company website, I mean, really, almost any tech company website, the first thing you see is, here's our product and what it does. That's making me guess at why I need it. And we believe that that's a backward way of trying to, create a category and create a market for your product.
Well, Chris Voss, who wrote the book Never Split the Difference, the FBI negotiator there, he's like, everybody is trying to sell their thing and all the people want is their problem solved. And if you can define that problem, help them clarify it and see it, now you're a partner. I trust you. You're not just trying to sell me a widget.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And so I would tell you an example of like how why creating a category is important. So let's take the category of electric cars. If you think about it, so I don't know, 20 years ago, and you and your family are having a conversation about what kind of car to buy. There was no conversation that said like, oh, should we buy a gas car or an electric car, right? And companies had made electric cars before, but they didn't really create a space in people's minds. So if you think of a category as a space in people's minds that understands and wants this particular thing, right? So finally, Tesla comes along and creates first the Roadster. And it was a brilliant strategy because first, what the Roadster proved was that an electric car could be actually really cool and better than a gas-powered car. It was kind of a wake-up call. And so over the next 10 years or so, as Tesla started to create more sedans and things like that, and set the standards for what electric cars could be, and people started to wake up to this new space opened up in people's minds. It didn't exist before. And because that space opened up, because a category of electric car opened up, it allowed others to say, General Motors, Ford, Volkswagen or whatever, to say, we're going to make an electric car now because there's a space to sell it into. So now, your family sits around and has a conversation about a car to buy. And there might be a conversation of, should we buy a gas car or an electric car? Because now this category exists that didn't exist before. Tesla was the one that opened it up, and Elon Musk has done some crazy things lately. Who knows where that's going? But basically, it's the power of creating and setting the rules for a category is that every other electric car you buy basically looks and acts like a Tesla because Tesla set the rules for how this should be, the expectations for how this should be, which kind of puts them very much in the driver's seat of the category. And it's one of the reasons that Tesla is valued at whatever it is, some crazy number, like 10 or 20 times more than, Ford, because those perceived category winners just create the most value and create the most, potential value for the future. And so it's all, it's really all about, if you don't open up that space in people's minds, there's nothing to sell into. You go back 20 years and you're trying to sell an electric car and everybody's going, why would I want an electric car?
And that's what I wanted to ask about, the timing on that. Because when you said sitting around the table, I'm like, it would have been crazy 10 years ago, maybe to have that come up. But when I was looking at my first car, right, electric cars existed. They were all in the history in the museums, but it was like there was no problem to be solved. So that discussion didn't even come in. Or I think when we, launched podcast interview marketing, I'd give my elevator pitch and people would nod their head and say, what's a podcast?
What's a podcast? Yeah, exactly.
Right.
There's a category that didn't exist 20 years ago either, right? Basically.
But the problem becomes how about timing that? You can create the market, but what tells you it's the right time to create that? And it's not too early. Would Elon Musk have that worked 20 years before, or would this have worked before people knew what a podcast was?
Well, that's a great question. And so there's a concept we've developed or worked on in the 10 years since Play Bigger came out. And that's actually borrowed from another book called Where Good Ideas Come From by Stephen Johnson. And there's a central concept to that book that he calls the adjacent possible. And as we've worked with companies over the years and used that concept, it becomes very, very, very helpful in thinking about this idea of categories and timing, whatever. So to briefly explain the adjacent possible, if you think of there's two factors that play into this, and one is what technology can actually do. Let's imagine like a vertical axis, right, on a chart and a horizontal axis. Vertical axis being what technology is capable of doing. How good is it? Does it work? Is it a lab experiment? All those kinds of things, right? And that's constantly changing, right? Constantly moving forward. And the other axis is what we as humans can accept into our lives. We can understand and feel comfortable with. Sometimes technology moves faster than we do, right? Or sometimes we are wishing something would exist and technology is not capable of doing it. Those aren't always in sync. But if you sort of chart like a line using those two axes, there's this sort of line that is on one side of it is everything that is already possible and exists, right? It's the technology works and we all adopt it into our lives. Our phones, our laptops, all those kinds of things fall into that space. And by the way, if you're a company and you're looking at this and you realize that you're building a product that sits firmly inside of that line of what's possible, you're probably making something that's entering somebody else's category that already exists, which is not always a great place to be. I mean, you're going to be trying to argue for market share at that point. On the other side of that line is everything that technology can't quite yet do well enough, or we can't quite accept into our lives. It's the not yet possible, right? And there's this band between them that Johnson calls the adjacent possible, which is the kinds of things that are just pushing the technology enough so it seems like really new and cool. And it's just pushing our expectations just enough to seem like it's really new and cool. But it's not so far beyond out into that not yet possible realm where it's going to be buggy and it doesn't really work and we don't quite understand why we'd want to use it. And if you're starting a company and building a product that's too far out of that not yet possible space, you may run out of money before you ever make this thing work, right? There's all the classic tales of like these visionary founders who found this company like General Magic or the human AI pin recently that went out of business before the thing ever came true, right? So if you can do that exercise and really understand like where that adjacent possible is, understand like what's already exists and what's not yet possible and what would push things to you want to land your company and product in that adjacent possible space. It should be, feel like it's the technology's new. It didn't, but it actually works. That you're stretching our imaginations a little bit, but not so far that we can't get it. And that's where things land throughout history. This is what Stephen Johnson's book actually is about. Throughout history, when products land in that adjacent possible space, that's when they catch on and take off. They make us feel like this thing really exists, but we're really excited about it. That's when the iPhone came out in 2007, or Musk introduces the electric car. If he had tried to do the Roadster 20 years before, the battery technology and all those other things wouldn't have been good enough. And the arguments about climate change and everything wouldn't have rested with us. We weren't aware of those things yet. We didn't think we needed an electric car for any other reason than it might be, cheaper than a gas car than buying gas. So those kinds of combinations of things are a good way to help you see if the timing's right.
Is that when you're talking about, like in Play Bigger, the from to, the Frodo? We were here, we're going to there?
It's related because what you have to do, so the from to is basically the idea of you have to take your customers from where they are to the space you wanted them to see. So if you are landing in the adjacent possible, by definition, you're doing something that's new to people. And you have to be able to take them, on that axis of our acceptance of products, you have to be able to take them with the story. Again, going back to your earlier point of pointing out the problem that they have that can now be solved in this new way, or maybe a problem that they didn't realize that new technologies or new contexts were creating, and make them understand that so you can pull them out to this spot in the adjacent possible where your product is landing. And make them see that. And by the way, the great visionary companies that really succeed not only land in that adjacent possible, but have an idea of where things go, out into the not yet possible over the years, and can articulate that to us. and say, like, so Jeff Bezos in 1994 starts Amazon as a bookstore because that was what we could understand in that early era of the internet, when people didn't even want to put their credit card on the internet, right? It was hard to find a rare book in your local bookstore because they can only carry so many titles. And here's this pitch of, we could find any book, just place an order and we'll mail it to you in 2 weeks in the early days of Amazon, right? But very early on, when Bezos was communicating with investors of the public or potential shareholders, he was saying, like, there's a journey we're taking you on. We're starting with books. We're going to get into other media. Eventually, the idea is to be this everything store retailer. And so being able to articulate that journey is really powerful. And that's the from to.
Yeah. And I love how you explain things, because the journalism background and the stories and the narrative, because that's what people remember there. And you even talk about, like, naming the villain, right? Of what are we going against? Explain that a little bit on how you can make it us versus them.
Well, you want to give people easy ways to remember things, right? Easy, like things that catch people's attention and minds. And so one of the things, when we work with a company, one of the most important things we deliver to the company is what we call the POV, and the POV is a story. Because first of all, people remember stories better than they remember a slide deck or, a bunch of facts, right? So we want to tell a story that first tell, and we always say, like, it's basically kind of like the plot of every, superhero movie you ever see, right? That the first part of the story tells you about the problem, i.e. the bad guy, right? It's like, the Batman movie where the first thing you see is the Joker blowing up crap and things like that in the city, and they're causing chaos. So we want to lay out the problem, and like in a superhero movie, the villain has a name, right? You want to give the villain a name, so you can refer to it, and it becomes a shorthand, right? And it kind of catches people's attention. So now you've laid out the problem. You've told us what the name of the villain is. You told us how bad this villain is. The problems this villain is causing. And the next thing we do in that story is then say, oh, but there's a solution. There's this new category. And by the way, it's not about the company or the product. We don't name the brand or anything. We're basically trying to describe that there's a solution that should exist, no matter who does it. And if we land on the truth that this problem is really true, and that a possible solution that looks like this would actually solve that problem, and all of that feels true, then we have described a category that should exist in the world. That's powerful. And only at the last part of that POV, and by the way, the category name, we name the category too, because you want to name the hero. So we try to come up with a name for the villain, a name for the hero, and then only at the very end of that POV, the last 10% maybe, we will say, and this company is the one that's bringing you this category, and we're qualified to do it because our team is this experience or whatever else. But this whole thing is not a branding exercise; it's a category creation exercise. And then what we would tell the company is, you do that and open up that space, the electric car space, like in people's brains, so it's going to accept the idea that this category should exist. Now you have a place for your brand to go into. The next layer of things you do is, we're going to create a brand so that our version of what solves this problem is what people think of first.
Your strong point of view is something that I continue to talk about, because I learned that from you when you were doing the podcast interviews for the book tour, right? And this idea of saying who you are, what you believe, right? When I hear people say, we have a full service digital marketing agency, right? It's like, what is that? Right? That tells me nothing of what you believe. I turn that off, but that strong point of view causes me to stop and think, do I believe that? Do I agree with it? Right? Is it interesting? And at the end of the day, people will either agree with it or disagree with it, right? They'll turn you up or turn you off, but they'll never forget you. And once you give them that lens to look through, they'll never see the world the same way.
Right. That's really true. Yeah. And the important, and to double down on that, what's so important about that is it has to be true. You can't be like fudging it or trying to manipulate, to make the category of the problem fit your product. In fact, when we go through, whether we do it or any company goes through this on their own, if you really go through this exercise, a lot of times you might realize that, what the product that we're making actually needs to be something slightly different from what we have to actually solve the problem we now see. And that's an interesting moment too. We've had, a number of like companies go, have an aha of like, we have to do something a little different than what we're doing.
Yeah. You and Mike at Category Design Advisors are amazing on that. Do you find that even people that come that they have this vision of this is the product or service, and now I'm going to figure out the problem that it solves in the category?
Yeah.
And so you're the truth tellers that throw the BS flag, and it's like better that you do it than the market does it when they take it to market.
Well, right. And yeah, exactly. Because that's what's going to do is just fall flat when that happens. But we've written about this before. Everybody talks about product market fit, right? That's the lingo in tech circles. I don't think a lot of people know that was first even articulated by Mark Andreessen like 15 years ago or something in a blog post. And it's interesting. You go back and look at the post. What he was describing was very much around the idea of category design. Like basically said that, it said the most important thing for a company is that the market exists, right? That the market demands your product. He went through the things that, VCs like might look at and invest in, like, is it the team? Well, the team doesn't, the team may be great, but the great teams can sometimes create a product that nobody wants. I mean, look at the team that created the Segway. It was a bunch of brilliant engineers, but they made a product nobody wanted. Is it the product itself? Well, that's not necessarily the most important thing. And he basically was saying that the most important thing is if the market exists and is going to demand the product, then even a crappy team with a so-so product is going to have it flying off the shelves. What he stopped short about was the idea that you could actually create the market and design and influence the market itself. He in his blog post, he kind of treated the market like this. My co-author Chris Lockhead likes to say, people treat the market like it's the weather. You can't do anything about it. It just exists, right? Which is actually not true. You can actually create a market. So we in our work, we reframe it. And we say, no, it's not product market fit. It's market product fit. The first thing you have to create is the market, and then create a product that fits into that market. That's a more effective strategy than creating a product and hoping you can find a market for it.
It takes me back, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here a little bit, because when I first was introduced to this concept, it's like, well, no, it's like if I've got to create a new market, that sounds like a lot of work. Can't I just go into a market that's already there and try getting a little bit of this? It was a different way to look at it. And I think what most people are looking, right? How can I capture a little bit of this market, right? How can I capture a little bit of it, as opposed to what you're teaching is name it, claim it, go out and create it?
Essentially, you're right on all counts here. So first of all, thousands and thousands of thousands and thousands of very viable and successful businesses exist in a market that's dominated by someone else. And that's a perfectly okay strategy. You have to know that your strategy then is about trying to whittle out some market share from somebody else's market. You have to constantly make arguments that my features or my pricing or whatever is better than somebody else's. And it's, it's Lyft to, behind Uber, or it's, Samsung behind Apple or whatever. There's nothing wrong with that. But there are a lot of companies that are more ambitious than that they, if you want to become one of those, super valuable, admired, enduring companies, the path to that is to essentially create a new market category, design it, win it over time, dominate it. And if you want to be one of those kinds of companies, then you have to think in terms of this sort of, this category creation model.
I'm going to take it from like the small E entrepreneur, because I never had the vision of I'm going to make a huge corporation and everything. I looked at it as like, I don't want to play somebody else's game. And as I look back on it over this last decade, I've had more fun designing the category and saying, no, this is different. This is a different way to look at it. Being able to almost set the own rules and the talking points, and then hearing other people start to pick those up and frame it. And so from that standpoint, it makes it, from a business owner, an easier conversation, almost an easier sale, because it's like you either believe it or you don't, right? And if you just want a commodity, well, we're not a commodity. And so to me, it's been powerful on that. Just as a small entrepreneur, right?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, yes, it's way more fun, right? than just copying somebody else. And it does make you stand out. I mean, like, being different is makes you stand out. And yes, either going to get it. It's not always the easiest sale, because if you're different, you have to constantly, tell people about something that they don't already know, right? Like, it's not an easy, 2-word, and I get it kind of thing. But absolutely to agree with you. I mean, look, going back in, I like you, Tom. I mean, I've personally been that kind of person throughout my career as an individual, right? I mean, I was a journalist, in like the early 1990s, writing about technology, and I didn't want to be just one other reporter covering technology. So I pitched this idea to USA Today of writing a column that talked about technology in a way that was very humorous, and that, would be a fun conversation at a bar, or around the family dinner, rather than what most people were writing, which was, very technical reviews of stories about, the latest PC or smartphone or something like that. And so in my personal career, it set me apart from everybody else, and it made it much more fun. I mean, it was a very different kind of way of approaching this, but I believe it was a really, an important key to whatever else has happened in my life afterwards, of deciding to be different and to stand out.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where, it's a longer sales process, and you've got to explain it. You can't just do a meme or something like that. But to me, it's much, much more fulfilling to live your own life, build your own business that you want, as opposed to, I'm just like them, only a little bit cheaper and much better looking. Right?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, I mean, I do think, we wrote about this in Play Bigger, that I think these ideas apply to an individual creating a career, on up to, somebody who's trying to create the next $1 trillion company. There was a great story. So talking about like a little small introvert that we ran across a while ago, a couple of years ago. So there's this woman in Seattle. I'm blanking on her name at the moment, but this woman in Seattle who was a very good athlete, basketball player, and she and her friends would go into traditional sports bars because they wanted to watch like the WNBA championships or something like that. And the traditional sports bars were like, they were filled with men, and, and they were serving fried chicken and all this other kind of stuff that, men want to eat. And they wouldn't, all the TV screens were all men's sports, they wouldn't turn on women's sports. And so this was at a moment in time, talk about like changing context and timing or whatever. This is a moment in time when women's sports, like the WNBA, the National Women's Soccer Team, U.S. Soccer Team, women's sports was really starting, team sports were really starting to like get some momentum. And she realized there was demand for that. So she decided to start her own. She bought a bar, and relaunched it as the most brilliant name ever, the sports bra. Bar, but said BRA, the sports bra, and catered it to women, all women's sports on the TV screens. A menu that was, maybe more friendly to women, and the place has been packed ever since. And and to the true category design kind of thing is that it inspired others, and now others women's sports bars have been opening around the country since then. And so this is an example of, it's not about necessarily about creating technology. It's not about, creating the next Apple. It can be something as simple as innovating on what a bar is.
And it's since it's been about a decade now since Play Bigger came out. Right?
2016 is when it came out.
Yeah. So a decade. And I love how when you wrote it, it was all Silicon Valley examples and stuff, but now people have applied that to so many different things. And, I know you've got a new book coming out, and I'm so excited to see what the new ideas are, a decade later. Any teasing on that?
Well, I mean, the adjacent possible was something that's not at all in the book Play Bigger. We've developed that and realized it works really well with companies. We've got a bunch of other like thinking tools that have become super valuable, and stories, because we've been working with companies and we've learned what works and what doesn't, and have some success stories that have come out of that, or for that matter, failure stories, why companies fall down at this. So we've tried to pack that all into this book and take the whole idea of category design to a new level. And by the way, I will make another point about that too. So we essentially, it's kind of a meta thing, right? The category designers created the category of category design when we wrote Play Bigger, right? And like a true, category creation strategy, the book came out, category design became kind of a thing. Others started to say they were define their careers as category designers, because if a category is not a category if there's only one person in it, right? A category is a category if there's others in that category. And other books have come out about category creation. So if you are a category creator and you want to continue to be the one who is seen as the dominant player in that category, you have to continue. It's not a one and done thing, right? You have to continue to set the rules of that category, continue to be the leader in thinking and product development and how this thing works. So it actually became important for us to, we've been blogging, we do podcasts, we do work with companies and all those kinds of things. But we just realized it became really important for us to get this next book out, to continue to try to be the ones who are setting the rules for this category. Here's how this should work, right? We want to tell the people, here's how this should work if you want it to be successful. So that others, even if they're going to hire a competitor, the competitor basically has to, the expectation is that they will do kind of what we do, which, and if that expectation is there, it basically strengthens our position because everybody's looking back to us. So we would say that to any company. You launch a category, you launch a strategy, and try to set the rules for that category, but it's something you have to continue to do, year after year after year to retain that dominant position.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's sort of like that book is the rules for the game. Now, anybody that talks about category design, you've got to follow more or less the framework of Play Bigger. I think back in 2018, you wrote the book Unscaled, right? About AI, back when most people couldn't spell AI, much less know what it stood for. And it's like, boom, now all these people are jumping up as AI experts. So I'm so excited to read that book, because that'll be like the new rules for the next decade.
Yeah. And unfortunately, Unscaled probably should have come out like 3 years later. It would have sold better.
It's one of those. You had the electric car of the 1970s.
That's right,
book,
exactly.
Right?
Probably, yeah. We were right about a lot of things just too early. That's we were headed adjacent possible.
Well, I was going to say, and that's why your fiction books, right, are always evergreen there, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and thanks for bringing it up, because as we were talking about a little bit earlier, is that I was a journalist in the 1990s, late 80s and early 90s, actually covering the breakup of the Soviet Union. And so I was over in Moscow a lot. I was seeing, it was just like a once in history kind of time, right? Things were upside down and backwards, and communists were trying to figure out how to be capitalists, and all these crazy things were happening. And so I actually had like all this detail about what was going on then, that I used to write a novel set in Moscow in 1991 about this American who goes over. He tries to make a fortune over in this newly emerging market, ends up caught in the middle of warring KGB agents and businessmen and things like that, which actually happened at that time. And so it's kind of a comic thriller, I guess I would call it. And it was really fun to do, and it's gotten a lot of good attention.
And that's Red Bottom Line, correct?
Red Bottom Line is called, yeah.
Well, as you look forward, right, where do you see AI impacting this? Any, I don't want to say predictions, right, but where do you see the ball going here?
So the way that the lens we view it through is the idea that that the greater the changes in context around companies around the world, whatever, the greater the changes in context, the more opportunities there are to create new market categories. Because that context is, so AI is part of that change in context, which means there's this new capability that is going to allow us to solve problems in a brand new way. It's also creating brand new problems that didn't exist before. I saw this one crazy thing the other day, which was people were using AI to generate fake receipts to submit for expenses, and you couldn't tell them from real receipts. And so that creates a new problem. And then a company popped up saying that we developed this product that can actually detect whether the receipt is real or not. So, so the new problem pops up because of a new context, and a new solution to that problem because of the new context. Anyway, so AI, geopolitics, the economy, all these things are part of contextual changes. And whenever there's these huge changes of context, that there are all these new opportunities to either solve an old problem in a new way, or new problems get created that need to be solved. And so that's the way we would look at AI is I'm not so interested in the battle between all of the models that are basically, those companies, the open AIs of the world and Microsoft and Google, whatever, they're like the railroad companies, the 1800s, right? They're building the railroads. And my interest is less in that, is that what do the railroads enable to be built on top of that? And so you see all these, amazing, cool companies. One I've been familiar with, like, for instance, is called Hippocratic AI, which is using very human-like AI to be like a medical companion, right? There's a giant shortage, problem to be solved, right? A giant shortage of nurses in this country. There's not even nurses available to make that weekly call to say, are you taking your medicine, for instance? And so this becomes something of a stopgap, right, to solve that problem. You have this automated but very human-like conversational bot that can call you up and say, hey, Mr. Schwab, are you taking your medication? How are you feeling today? Actually have that conversation. And we're going to see a lot of that. And that's what's exciting to me about what AI is going to do.
Yeah. A lot of problems in the world, but there's no better time to be alive.
Yeah, well, I hope so.
We shall see. Well, Kevin, what's ordinary to you is amazing to others, right? Thank you so much. And where can people find you? Where can they connect?
Well, our firm is called Category Design Advisors. Simply categorydesignadvisors.com if you want to go on and look on the web. My name, Kevin Maney. I've got a website with all my other crazy stuff like books and music and things like that on there if you want to find that. And those are probably the easiest ways.
Excellent. Well, definitely check out Category Design Advisors. And if you're listening at this is toward the end of 2005, beginning of 2006, check out the new book.
Thanks, Tom. Okay.
Wow. What an eye-opener with Kevin Maney. He just reminded us that if you're not designing your category, you're just another option in someone else's. From the power of starting with the problem, not the product, to understanding the adjacent possibles, we saw how timing, narrative, and differentiation are everything. If you want to dominate your space, you have to name it, you have to claim it. Now, here's your next step. Reframe how you show up as a podcast guest. Stop thinking of yourself as just a guest. Start thinking of yourself as a category creator. Use your interview to name the problem, define the villain, and articulate your bold point of view. That's what turns listeners into leads and leads into loyal clients. If you want help building a podcast interview marketing strategy around your unique category, check us out at interviewvalet.com. We'll help you turn every interview into an asset that grows your brand and grows your business. Until next time, remember, ordinary products get ignored. Category creators get invited back.